This is going to be another video in my Beatles catalog, stereo versus mono, and today I'm going to talk about A Hard Day's Night, which is why I have my Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon t-shirt on. Makes no sense at all, right? I know. I don't, what are you going to do? So anyway, so far we have covered the albums Please Please Me with the Beatles and the American albums Meet the Beatles and Beatles' second album. And so I have to say, first off, what a pleasure and enjoyable experience it was listening to this album from start to finish, both in stereo and in mono. The Beatles really hit their songwriting stride with A Hard Day's Night. It was the first album that doesn't feature any covers. Nearly every song could have been a single, legitimately could have been a single. That's how great the songwriting on this album was. It's just flawless from start to finish. I had such a great time, and I listen to the Beatles a lot, I have to tell you, but just to kind of sit there and concentrate on both mixes, stereo and mono, and hear these awesome songs from start to finish was just such an enjoyable experience. I have to say, it really, I regard a lot of the Beatles' later catalog a little bit higher than some of their earlier albums, but I gotta say, just listening to A Hard Day's Night, just what a flawless album, seriously, from start to finish. So I'm gonna start off showing what I have of the A Hard Day's Night album, and then I'm gonna go through my notes from listening to both the stereo and the mono mixes. I do not have any original pressings of the British versions. Everything I have are later pressings. The first version I have, I believe this was a 1990s pressing, and it's a limited edition. It's on the Capitol label. It's actually still sealed. I bought this in the 90s, and for whatever reason, just because I listen to CDs a lot, maybe, I guess, and but whatever, I kept this sealed, so I can't show you what the vinyl looks like, but nonetheless, looks like every other vinyl copy of A Hard Day's Night. And that's a mono version. This is another mono version. This is from the 2013 vinyl box set, which is a pretty close reproduction of what the original album looked like. And this is pressed on the 180 gram vinyl. So it's nice and heavy, and the yellow Parlophone label. I'm not going to show the stereo because they really look identical. They're both in the same sleeve. The stereo copy that I have is also the 180 gram, and that is from the stereo box set, which was also released in 2013. And also, I've not broken the seal on this one either. I tend to listen to CDs a little more than I do in vinyl, and so most of the albums in my Beatles stereo box set are still sealed, this one not being an exception, so can't show you the vinyl on this one, but again, it looks. And one of the debates that I have is what's cooler, the American vinyl cover or the British cover. And I don't know, like some days I feel like this is the cooler cover, but then I also love the US, the United Artists, where it's just kind of their faces cropped. Both very cool covers. Another thing, everybody thinks in terms of iconic album covers, Abbey Road and Sgt. Pepper and Revolver and Rubber Soul, but I think this is not to be left out of the conversation for sure. I love this cover, and I also love the cover of the American version. Another copy that I have, and I think this might be from Germany, this is called Yeah, 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 A Hard Day's Night. Pictures on the back are different. The liner notes are the same. The track listing is the same, but obviously you can tell what the difference is, but still, this is on the Odeon label. And then when we get to the CDs, this was the 1987 issue of A Hard Day's Night. And the back cover photographs were kind of put into this sort of collage form. And then on the inside of the booklet, they had the liner notes. I'm not going to open that up. And then this is the 2009 remaster of A Hard Day's Night. With some extra photographs and, whoops. I included, there's a theater near my house. It's about, I don't know, half-hour drive away. It's a Redford theater, and they showed A Hard Day's Night maybe 6 or 7 years ago, so I kept the ticket stub, and I guess I just kind of tossed it in here in my remastered CD version. But this has got a, extensive booklet which has some essays and additional photographs from the movie. And the studio photographs of them recording A Hard Day's Night actually made their way onto the back cover of Beatles 6, if you're familiar with what the back cover of that album looks like. That's the American Capitol version. So those photographs that are on the back of that album were actually photos taken from the recording sessions for Hard Day's Night. Just a little bit of trivia there. And I just realized now that I forgot to bring out the CD version from the mono box set. So I'm going to grab it right now. That's what this looks like. Again, with all the mono CDs, it's a mini replica of the actual mono album. And the CD itself comes in a little, cellophane or whatever sleeve there. And they all have like a little plastic sleeve that these go into, which is very nice. Although, just because, if you can see, this is the way that this album is put together, it kind of catches a little bit on the thing here, so it doesn't, there we go, it doesn't fit too snugly on there. But again, as far as album packaging goes, I'm always going to go, the thing that closely resembles the original album. Although the stereo booklet, obviously it's got some essays and some additional photographs, so probably if it came down to it, I would go with the stereo version first, and then this mono version, and then the 1987 in terms of, album packaging, how I would rate that. Which is not to say the 1987 version, unlike some of the other 1987 releases, I think the packaging is, pretty decent. So anyway, now to the songs themselves, and do I prefer the mono or the stereo version? So the song A Hard Day's Night really was a coin flip. There wasn't too much difference. There was nothing that stood out for me between either version. They both sounded pretty comparable, and I really had to strain to kind of hear differences between the two when I put them on. So A Hard Day's Night, it's really hard to call. I'm just going to say that's a tie. Couldn't really determine one way or another which was better. I should have known better. In mono, the harmonica intro goes all the way through. So with A Hard Day's Night, we're going to start seeing more differences between the mono and stereo mixes. There were some negligible differences with Please Please Me and with the Beatles, but now with A Hard Day's Night, we're actually starting to see where some of the songs are actually different mixes, and there's going to be different things that you can notice in each song. And so I should have known better is the first track where there's actual, like almost like a different, I don't want to say take, so to speak, but so for the harmonica intro in mono, it plays all the way through. The harmonica goes all the way through on the intro. However, in the stereo, it cuts out a little bit of the way through. And so I'm imagining it's a different take of the harmonica solo. It's not just that it dropped out and it was a studio glitch. I mean, it really was a different take of the harmonica intro. So that's one of the differences that you'll notice in the mono and the stereo version. In the stereo version, I find the bass is a lot louder, and for me, you know, I'm all about the bass. Anytime there's, you know, heavier bass, for me, it just enriches the sound. It makes it a little fuller. So, you know, that was good, but all in all, the mix that I enjoyed more was mono, just because the vocals were a lot brighter and it just kind of stood out more. The particular mix in mono just kind of grabbed me a little bit more, and comparing between the two, I really felt the mono was the better mix. Now, If I Fell, the difference between the mono and the stereo mix, in mono, John's vocal intro is single tracked, where in stereo, it's double tracked. Apart from that, Paul's voice on the second part the second lyric where he sings, "And I would be sad if our new love was in vain." In the stereo version, it gives out on the second lyric. So it just drops out. It's almost like they cut it out before it had a chance to strain. Where in the mono version, the full lyric, he sings the full part of "was in vain," and it strains out. So you get to hear his voice straining in mono, where in stereo it cuts out. The stereo has a much fuller sound of that version. The bass is louder, the vocal harmonies are richer. It's a really great mix. So stereo, far and away for me, was the much better version of If I Fell. Now the next track is I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. Stereo, hands down, was the better mix. The bass is louder, the drums are louder. The song just packs such a incredible wallop in stereo compared to mono. In mono, the rhythm guitar strumming is clear. That's one of the things that you notice, I guess, more between the two mixes. The vocal is very upfront in the mix. It's almost like the backing track in mono is superfluous. It's just, it really concentrates the vocal. If you really want to hear George's vocal, you know, up front and kind of, you know, without being buried in the mix, the mono would be the version to hear. But just in terms of listening experience, the song is just so much more driving, has so much more of a punch in stereo. The vocal definitely is up front in the mix, but in mono, it's really up front. I mean, that's the only thing that you really focus on in that particular song. And I Love Her. The differences between the two songs, in mono, Paul's vocal is single tracked, and in stereo, his vocal is double tracked. And I actually found, listening to the 1987 stereo CD, I'm sorry, the 1987 release on CD, which is the mono version, it actually sounded better than the 2009 mono version. I'm not sure why that is. So if you're trying to, you know, juggle between is the 1987 mono version better or the remastered 2009 version, I actually feel like the 1987 version of And I Love Her sounded better. Strange as that may seem, they're both mono mixes, but for whatever reason, the 1987 mono mix was brighter. But in stereo, I found the bass was louder. I felt like there was a fuller ambience. It was just a richer sound overall. So I would say the stereo version, the 2009 remastered stereo version, sounds better than both the 1987 mono and the 2009 mono. So stereo, also the acoustic guitar stood out more in stereo. So I'm going to go with stereo on that one. Then Tell Me Why. They're actually, Tell Me Why is, even though they sound slightly similar, they're separate takes. They're not the same take. The mono take is different from the stereo take, or the stereo version. And they're actually in different keys. In mono, John's voice is single track. In stereo, it's double track, but still, it's completely different takes. So just sort of a bit of trivia there. And again, that was a coin flip for me. I mean, if I had, you put a gun to my head, I was going to say stereo is probably the better version there. it just sounds punchier and more vibrant, I think, compared to the mono version. Can't Buy Me Love in mono, the vocal is definitely more out in front in the mix. The acoustic guitar is clear also, and strangely the cymbal is clear. But the stereo mix for me was a much better version. It's got a fuller sound. The song swings a lot more in stereo. It's just a lot more, I'm going to call it danceable or whatever. The guitar solo totally jumps out in stereo. Compared side by side, the mono to the stereo, there's just no comparison. The guitar is just so, the lead guitar and the guitar solo, George's guitar, it's really like 3D in stereo, where in mono it's just kind of a little flatter. So I feel like the mix in stereo is much superior to the mono. And anytime at all, in mono, the vocal really jumps out of the speakers. It's just a much better vocal. Listening to the vocal is much better in mono. And to me, in that song, John's vocal carries the tune. The thing that attracts you to that song is just John's vocal. Not that the instrumental backing is bad, but I feel like the highlight of the song is just John's vocal. And in mono, you can just hear it much clearer. In stereo, the backing track is punchier, but John's vocal just kind of gets swallowed up in the mix. So for me, to my ears, I prefer the mono version of Anytime at All. And I'll Cry Instead, the mono mix sounds pretty flat. It's just not as punchy. The stereo version, the rhythm track almost sounds like a different take. That's just how more vibrant it is. The bass is a lot clearer, and the bass really drives that song, especially in the, Show You What Your Lovin' Man Can Do section. The bass just like pops out of the speakers. So I'm going to go with stereo on that. Things We Said Today, stereo, hands down the better mix. There's lots of echo on the vocal. It's a great mix. The vocal is out in front. The backing track is still very clear though. In mono, it really sounds one-dimensional compared to the stereo. The bass is lower in the mix. In the first verse, I noticed that Paul's vocal is single-tracked in mono, but in stereo, on the first verse, his vocal is double-tracked. So that's one of those, little nuanced, differences in the mix. You can't do that. In mono, the vocal is very upfront in the mix, and also the cowbell. It's like the cowbell and the vocal dominate the mono mix. The stereo mix, the song is a lot heavier, and the backing track sounds fuller and more vibrant. So I'm going to go with the stereo mix on that. I really enjoyed listening to that more in stereo. And finally, so that was... I'm sorry, I'm getting a little lost in my notes. So When I Get Home, in mono, the vocal and the rhythm track are clearer, but in stereo, the vocal is a little more buried in the mix. The bass guitar in the stereo is a lot fuller, and just it sounds more vibrant. Just When I Get Home, I really, one of those songs I really love, kind of one of those deep album tracks, and I just found the experience was just a lot more enjoyable in stereo. You can't do that. Mono is very upfront. Like I said, the vocal and the cowbell are very upfront. Stereo, the song's heavy. So where are we at? Sorry, I'm getting a little lost in my notes. I'll Be Back, the final track on the album. In mono, the vocals are a lot clearer, and the good acoustic guitar is a little clearer. But in stereo, even though there's a lot of echo on the vocals, the bass is very upfront in the mix. And the line, I Thought That You Would Realize by John, it sounds less strained in the stereo. I don't know if that's because there's more echo, but the sound of the guitars is a lot more fuller. So I'm going to go with stereo on I'll Be Back. So that being said, which version did I prefer? Which version did I enjoy more between the mono and stereo? I would say the stereo version, hands down, just because it's a fuller sound, the bass is deeper. The vocals stand out a little bit more. Just, if I had to go back and listen to one version again, I think it would be the stereo. It just packs more of a punch. And again, neither version is weak. There's, the mono is a great mix. The mono is a great version, and stereo is a great version. However, choosing between the two, I'm going to go with stereo for A Hard Day's Night. And there may be some of you that disagree with me, and that's wonderful, but the one thing we cannot disagree on is that A Hard Day's Night is a flawless, and I mean that, no filler, just a flawless, perfect album. And that being said, I want to sign off. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for the likes. Thanks for the comments. And the next one I'm going to do is going to be the United Artists American soundtrack of A Hard Day's Night. Thanks, everybody.